This is the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching and publishing services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Ellen Naylor, author of Win-Loss Analysis, How to Capture and Keep the Business You Want. Ellen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much.
Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I think the first thing I would say is think about how you're going to market your book right while you're writing it, because it'll help you focus on that audience as you write the book. You'll think about the right words to say, how to express yourself and who they are. And it will help you start to develop your marketing plan, which is a lot more time-consuming than writing the book. So that would be my major piece of advice.
That is great advice. Know who you're going to write to. Know your audience.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And think about that. Think about that marketing plan.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the flip side. What do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, I did it as a indie publisher, so I can only speak to that, if that's okay. It's really figuring out all the steps you need to go through just to get published, such as when do you get your ISBN? Where do you get your book categorized so libraries will know where to shelf it if you market to libraries? And speaking of libraries, no one told me until late in the game that libraries like to do business with Ingram and Spark and Baker and Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly they don't like to do business with Amazon, and a lot of first-time authors, it's Amazon, right? You're just kind of getting your feet wet, right? So and figuring out, the next step, kind of figuring out how to post your book onto Amazon. That's a bowl of tacos. So there's a lot of little details. And another angle that I didn't think of right away, but, I was advised, was to enter your book into various book competitions. And, as a first-time author, you're like, book competitions? What's that? How do I find out about them? It's out there, but, it's just another one of those steps. And, you want to get your book written up so you have distribution. And, if you go with a traditional publisher, they do all this for you, like Publishers Weekly. If you're lucky, you get in there, really lucky, first-time author. But Blue Ink Review, some of the other ones where you pay them a little money and they do a write-up for you to help with distribution. And lastly, just organizing, kind of back to that first question, a list of people who are going to help you market that book. And maybe you can ask them to write something up on Amazon or Goodreads about your book, or just figure out what's in it for them to do that. Maybe you send them a free book. Maybe you give them some free service that they'd really value. So,
could you share a little bit more information?
It's a big challenge.
I was going to ask you, could you share a little bit more information about these competitions? Because that's one thing we have not touched on yet on the show. I'd love to get some more information about how that works and basically the process that entails with that.
I didn't hear your question about the competition.
Yes, you said you've entered you talked about using it as a strategy to enter the book into different competitions, different writing competitions.
Competitions. Oh, absolutely. Like IPPI, what is that? The Independent Publishers Association. I entered my book in that one and got a bronze, and I was thrilled. I figured it was like throwing out a boomerang almost, because I got something back, but I didn't expect it. But you can look on the internet and just ask independent book, a competition, Google it, and they do come up. I'm trying to remember some of the others, and I'm off the top of my head, I don't remember them. But IPPI is a really good one, IPPY for short, if you Google it. And there's about, the year I was involved, there were 5,000 competitors. And
wow.
There's some number, though, of categories, and so your odds are better than it sounds like. There's fiction and nonfiction within that, business, and I would say there were probably 35 categories once you added them all up. So, and then they gave out gold, silver, and bronze, and sometimes there's ties. And in my case, there was a tie silver, else I wouldn't have gotten the bronze. So, I was pretty happy about that. So, but it costs a little bit of money to enter these. Some of them are free, but most of them, that's how they make their living. So there's many more entries than takers. And, you can put a little sticker on your book then, and then send it back into Ingram and Spark or whoever it is that's distributing your book, the digital version with a new cover that has that little, which I haven't done yet, but that is a good idea to do too. All these marketing things take time, though, don't they?
They do, and I was going to ask you mentioned that there was an investment involved to enter the competitions. Just ballpark, what are the typical amounts that you found?
It's anywhere from $50 to a couple $100, $250, something like that. And why I say $250 is just for IPI, for example, there was a category. There's several categories you could compete in. So mine was I remember the new author. And I picked new nonfiction author, and I also picked this business one. And I think there was another one I remember off the top of my head, but there were 4 categories, and I think I ended up spending maybe $250. And one of them was for my region, and I didn't realize the region meant my region of the United States. Well, my book is a global book, so I would never have been considered for that, so I wasn't clear what that meant. So also take a good hard look at what people, how they're defining the categories to make sure you'd even be a fit,
That is excellent advice. And I know we've touched on marketing a little bit so far, but I'd love for you to share a marketing strategy that you've used in your book launch that has worked well.
Okay. I think the one thing that has worked the best for me, I don't know if it's really a strategy, but is getting speaking gigs. Since you sell books that way right there, and but you also, it's word of mouth, and word of mouth really sells books. And because they go home and they tell their friends, or they go to work and tell their friends and colleagues about your book. And the other one, which was really strange, but I decided to post just a couple of things about my book on my Facebook account. And I don't have a Facebook book account. I just have a personal account. And I had someone take a picture of me when I was selling my book along with a lot of other people at this book show. And people went to my Amazon site and bought books. And these were just my friends. I shouldn't say just my friends, but I didn't think they'd be that interested. So I was kind of surprised. It was a very pleasant surprise. I thought, oh, okay. It isn't just mom and dad and your brothers who buy your book, but your friends buy your book too. So.
And it's cool when they rally around you. I know my very first book was called Eat Less and Move More. And when I'd talk about the book or I was promoting it, and when the book launched and go, hey, we made the top 100 in Amazon, and just, literally over 100 likes. It was just so nice to get that support in that community. And they make it feel like they're part of it too. So it's one of those things where they're cheering you along. And it's just a great way. I mean, as I always say, and you've heard this line many times, your network is your net worth. And it really does help with that support.
It really does. It really does. There's a lot of social media things you can do as well, which I'm sure you've covered in many times over. So I just thought I'd mention some of the more old-fashioned ways. I feel like Facebook these days is getting pretty old-fashioned too. I know a lot of people use Pinterest and all the other ones that are out there to great success, and Bubblish, and there's so many different ways to get your book out there. But as a solopreneur, which is what I am, I have to decide where it is I get the best bang for my time. And I noticed for me it's Twitter and LinkedIn, because it's a business book. So you need to think about that when you're marketing your book is, well, where are your readers on social media? And sometimes you find out by experimenting, oh, they're actually on Pinterest or whatever. But business readers tend to be on LinkedIn and Twitter as much as anywhere. Although I do have a friend who's a very, very successful using Pinterest as a business guy too. So, it's
Excellent.
what you make of it and the time you put into it to build your network, as you were saying.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Well, I am a geek, so I have hundreds of books. I'm not kidding. But since we're talking about publishing, I'm going to stick with that. That would be most appreciated, I think, by your audience. And my favorite book there is Writing Nonfiction by the late Dan Pointner. and the subtitle is Turning Thoughts into Books. And, you know, I was having a terrible time picking out a title for my book. In fact, a colleague had suggested one, and so I went to this publishing event and was asking people, what do you think about this title? I'm just really struggling. And the title this friend had was Win, Lose, or Draw. And I thought that was so clever. Well, I went to this thing, and several people told me how bad it was because it's the name of a game and a TV show and would never be found. And so I went back to the drawing board, and I read this book, this chapter in particular, about how to put a title to your book. And Dan's advice was, and I'm just paraphrasing, if you can't think of something terrifically clever that'll catch people's eye for a title, then call it what it is, if it's findable on the internet. So that's why I went with win-loss analysis, because it's findable on the internet, and that's what the book's about. So I would say I really value Dan, and he's written, I don't know how many books in this area, more than anybody else. So, you know, depending on what your genre is, Dan will have a book for you to read, fiction, nonfiction. I don't know how many books the man has published. He just passed away a couple of years ago. Good guy in our space. I'm sure you're familiar with it too.
Mm-hmm. Well, to transition to our last question, I'd like to ask you, what is your favorite quote and why?
Well, I have a lot of quotes I like, but one of my favorites is from Maya Angelou, and it goes like this: I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I have conversations with many people, given what it is I do, and I kind of keep this in mind, and I kind of have an intention in mind before every conversation. I want the person I'm talking to feel better by the end of the conversation than when we said hello. And I thank her for that, because I might not have thought about that if I hadn't really taken that one to heart. So.
Yeah, you are a second guest who has shared that quote. That's one of my favorites as well. It's all about how you make people feel, because that's how they're going to remember you. Sure
it is. And, you know, you feel pretty good about yourself that way, too. You can make other people feel good. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Ellen, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Probably through my website. It's my name, ellennaylor.com, ELLENNAYLOR, or my Twitter handle's at Ellen Naylor.
Excellent.
But if you just Google my name, I'm pretty findable. So it's an unusual last name. There's not that many Naylors out there, so.
Excellent. Well, Ellen, I want to thank you again for being a guest on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Oh, thank you. And you, too. You've written a lot of books, so you have that wonderful experience.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.